What's up, guys? Welcome back to Jimmy Talks. I had mentioned in a prior video, I don't even remember which one, it had a comment asking me if I could do a video on COVID. Well, here it is, and I have divided the video via timestamps, and you can skip forward to whatever section you like, or you can watch the whole thing. Regardless, I'm just glad you're here. So, COVID. It's just such a weird time. It was so strange. Nothing made sense. This outlandish, manipulative, weird period in history. Let me just state this and clarify this immediately, too. This wasn't just a pandemic. It was also a carefully curated global scam. It was a psyop of incredible proportions, and it was designed to reshape society under the frame of so-called public health. Now, before I continue, I know that the word scam and psyop makes some people squeamish, and they immediately start thinking of this is a conspiracy theorist, this guy's crazy. This is not a conspiracy, though, and I will admit there is genuinely some stupid-ass conspiracy theories out there, but this is not the case of one. So just hold on for a second. Let me explain in this video what made everything so bizarre. Before you dismiss this, let's go over exactly what happened. Because COVID was such a confusing time and no one truly knew what was true and what was absolute manufactured nonsense. A lot of stuff was called misinformation and fake, and some stuff was scrubbed from the internet and even removed off of archive websites. It was a confusing time. It was just full of lies. Some people, like myself, had a general idea. Something just seemed off about all of this. It was a gut feeling that none of this and the narrative, it just didn't add up. But the moment that really pissed people off was if you dared to question anything, even the most basic and rather innocent questions. The backlash was immediate and it was brutal. People were banned from social media. They were shadow banned. They were suspended, demonetized. They were attacked in person for not wearing a mask. Families having divides over vaccination status. People calling the cops and reporting people for going to church or having a backyard social gathering. They were socially ostracized everywhere for just asking why. Why? Why the mask? I thought Fauci at the beginning said it didn't work, and he did. Now he says surgical mask. Now he says it's N95s. Now he's saying it's a cloth mask you can make out of your fucking underwear. Why all of this fear? Why the mandates for the COVID shot? Why do I have to get it or else I'll lose my job? The only way to support my family? What if I don't want it? Why the sudden economic collapse for small businesses while mega corporations like Amazon and Walmart got insanely richer? Asking questions like this, though, meant that you were a disgusting vermin and you shouldn't be trusted. Speaking out wasn't just frowned upon, it was treated like a crime against humanity itself. I remember going to a restaurant back in 2021, maybe 2022, and I wasn't wearing a mask. And this lady got in my face and she blocked me from leaving the restaurant by standing in the doors and berating me. I just looked at her and I walked past her. I didn't give a fuck. Same thing happened to me in a gas station. I was cashing out like anyone would do at the gas station. And I was making small talk with the cashier. Then I told him, thanks, have a nice day. Then as I'm walking out, he blindsided me and screamed at me as I was leaving for not wearing a mask. He's like, put on a mask. I could have just ignored it, but I told him to shut the fuck up before I left because that's pretty gay. Don't talk to me like we're buddies, and then as I'm leaving, scream at me. I should slap you. But anyways, this video isn't an example of me. Rather, it's just experiences that I had as well as many other people who simply just questioned the narrative. It was such a stupid, strange, rage-baiting time when you analyze all the stuff us normal people had to deal with. Like, for example, do you remember when everyone was wearing masks, even when walking alone, outside, in an open park? The stupid little footprints that was taped to the grocery store floor, 6 feet apart, a constant visual reminder of the manufactured terror. Do you also remember that every store, their card reader, had saran wrap covering it? Like an attempt at safety, and the saran wrap was never changed, meaning it was just as contaminated, if not more so, than if the card reader just got left alone and wiped down every single time. It defeated the entire purpose, yet it was mandated and enforced unquestioned. You start asking a bunch of questions like this. People were walking around in full gas masks and hazmat suits like they were preparing for a nuclear fallout in the middle of a fucking Target. The fucking theatrics of all of this was so strange. And let's not forget the ultimate gaslighting tactic. Anything negative that happened at all was instantly blamed on COVID. Car crash? COVID. Power outage? COVID. Your goldfish fucking died. Must have been COVID. It became this like universal scapegoat, absolving anyone of any actual responsibility for literally anything. Then there was the retardation of just another blatant display of Americans being ripped off with low-paying jobs and the purchasing power of the dollar being dog water. Some people actually made more money on unemployment benefits from the COVID relief packages than they did working their actual jobs. This created a massive disincentive to return to work, and why would they? But on the long term and wider scale for society, this further strangled the economy and supply chains, and practically every single establishment during COVID had these now hiring signs, which then leads us to something else, just another layer of chaos, to be honest. You can't go to the fucking restaurant and eat because they don't have anyone to serve you. They don't have anyone to cook the food because they're making more money on unemployment. The stores were running out of everyday basic items like toilet paper. Remember when everybody was beating the shit out of each other for toilet paper? Do you remember when all the stores were out of eggs and all the meat was gone hours after they just restocked it? You know, while Amazon, Target, and Walmart had record high profits. So small businesses shut down permanently overnight, and they were called not essential, so they couldn't even open. While the retail giants like those three thrived, really. Imagine working hard your whole entire life running a business and then it gets shut down during COVID and your life's work is ruined. It was a strange time, and that's really just an understatement. Well, it wasn't just that. It was a deeply unsettling dystopian time where common sense no longer existed. And to me, frankly, it seemed like blind obedience was really what the point was. Something felt really off to a lot of people during this time, but it took a couple of years after the initial shock and awe, the fog of war, so to say, of this event, and the censorship partially being lifted for the truth, or at least significant cracks in the official narrative to finally start emerging. Now, let's get into the origins of COVID and how they covered up that it was actually a lab leak out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. It wasn't some guy eating a bat. The very foundation of the pandemic narrative was a lie. A story pushed by the government, the media, of course, they just work for the government, and so-called experts, was that officially the virus, COVID, originated naturally, like from a bat, possibly because someone was eating it or something. That's what they told us. A guy ate a bat. Now you all got COVID. Some guy ate a bat and we all got COVID. Yet no bat hosting the virus was ever found, and zero evidence supported a guy even eating it as the origin. Meanwhile, literally blocks away from that food market where they said it was ground zero of COVID because some guy was eating a bat, was the Wuhan Institute of Virology in China. A facility known to be conducting high risk, this is what it was called, gain of function research, specifically, on exactly this type of virus, which was research specifically aimed at making viruses more transmissible or deadly to study potential pandemics. Wow. If you said that in 2020 like I did, your account was banned. I remember posting about that shit on Facebook in June 2020. The pandemic had just started a couple months ago, and I had already read this. We'll get into that later. Not me specifically, but how I found that out. But anyways, what was more alarming about this place studying making pandemics, and that's just where it happened to start, is that the research was funded by none other than the guy, Dr. Anthony Fauci himself. Remember the cringy Redditor that made a Fauci song? He's like, Dr. Fauci. The guy everyone praised like he was fucking the Lord himself. He used the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases through a sub-grant to the EcoHealth Alliance. So, was it really a conspiracy theory to conclude that a lab-engineered virus accidentally leaked during risky research funded by the very people leading the US pandemic response was a plausible, even likely origin? Or are we just going to say it was from a bat because we need to save face? Of course not. It was basic logic. It's basic investigative thinking, yet anyone who simply questioned the natural origin story, anyone who dared to suggest the lab leak possibility, was instantly labeled as a conspiracy theorist. You're gaslit into submission and systematically silenced online. Some social media platforms censored people, shadow banned them, banned accounts totally for discussing the lab leak hypothesis. This was in Twitter. It wasn't X yet, it was Twitter under Jack Dorsey, and the censorship was insane. And it wasn't just heavy-handed censorship, it was insane. And it targeted actual scientists speaking out on the platform, journalists, and not just ordinary citizens. Then shockingly, I use that lightly, around 2024, maybe 2025, after years of ridicule and suppression, the lab leak theory suddenly became the official position of the U.S. intelligence community and mainstream media. Wow! It was presented as a new and surprising revelation. And this new information was just quietly slipped into the narrative with barely a whisper of accountability for the years of cover-up and censorship and the lockdowns and social ridicule. End of the story, though, right? Move along, nothing else to see here. And the public largely just shrugged it off. It wasn't really a big deal when it hit the news. Everyone was sick and tired of COVID, I guess, but for those of us who were banned, mocked, ridiculed, called crazy for stating the obvious back in 2020, it was pure vindication. I remember specifically posting about this in June 2020. It was an article about Dr. Li Meng Yan. Or Yan, I don't know. She was a Chinese scientist who fled China, and she gave interviews to American news outlets, the Western news outlets. BBC, Sky News was in the American news, claiming she was a political refugee, and stated purely that she knew COVID was developed as a bioweapon at the Wuhan Institute of Virology because she worked there. Her evidence was specific and extremely technical, but what happened to that story? It got buried immediately. It got memory hold. No one gave a shit. No one even knew what you were talking about. If you presented this evidence to someone, they still wouldn't believe you. You probably never even heard of it, and that's because within 48 hours, guess what happened? Her Twitter account was suspended. Google began de-indexing the documents she released. Chinese state media instantly labeled her claims as baseless rumors, and Western fact-checkers, like Snopes, full of shit, hate when people use that fucking website, and the other media outlets, they started calling it fake, and they gaslighted anyone who mentioned her. But now in 2025, that information is totally true, and there's no accountability now? Now, here's the critical question. If this was a truly genuine global pandemic requiring unprecedented international scientific cooperation to fight a true war against an invisible enemy, this deadly disease with a 97% alive rate, why would authorities actively suppress, censor, and bury evidence pointing to the origin? Why would they silence scientists like Dr. Li? Why would Dr. Fauci, who funded their Wuhan research, privately admit in emails, which was later revealed via the Freedom of Information Act, that the virus showed signs of engineering, meaning it was man-made, while publicly dismissing the lab leak as a conspiracy theory? The answer is obvious, because the origin story was a crucial part of the cover story needed to launch the next phase of the agenda. Admitting a lab leak, especially one involving U.S.-funded research, would have shattered the narrative of a natural disaster and would have exposed what was going on at the highest levels. The cover-up wasn't about science. It was about protecting powerful interests and maintaining the manufactured crisis framework. Now, I'm going to sideline a bit here, and before we even move on further in the video and get into the weeds about the absolute core of the scam, which is the vaccines and all the money people made off of COVID, we need to understand how truth is often established, especially when direct proof is suppressed or hidden. we're going to rely heavily on circumstantial evidence. Circumstantial evidence is indirect evidence that suggests a fact in question rather than directly proving it. It requires the investigator, so to say, to draw inferences and make logical conclusions based on the evidence. While not as immediately conclusive as direct evidence, for instance, in real life, the police catching a killer with a murder weapon, circumstantial evidence, when enough is gathered, is incredibly powerful, and it is routinely used in the court system to establish guilt. In the case of the COVID scam, we have a mountain of circumstantial evidence like strange coincidences, sudden policy shifts, lies and cover-ups, hidden financial interest, suppressed science, glaring contradictions, that, when viewed together, paint an undeniable picture of deliberate manipulation. The lab origin cover-up is just the first, foundational piece of this circumstantial evidence. Now, let's get back to the scam, like the vaccines, or as they should be more accurately referred to, the experimental gene therapies, otherwise known as the jab. I will try my best to avoid utilizing common buzzwords, though, like the jab, as I aim to take a professional and direct approach with this video and not using wording and verbiage that may seem to be off-putting or unintelligent to people, as we're dissecting the core of the scam and I am going to present you with real information and not bullshit. Anyways, now let's get to the vaccines. Now, to be super straightforward with you, the COVID vaccines, specifically the mRNA shots from Pfizer and Moderna, did not work as advertised, and the entire narrative around them was a deliberate fraud. First, let's address the most basic deception, and that was the very definition of a vaccine. If you've been watching for a little bit, you know I've said in multiple videos, you all know this. I say we need to look at the definition of words. We need to know what words mean before we start fucking using them. You need to know what you're talking about before the words come out of your mouth. For hundreds of years, a vaccine was understood as a biological preparation that provides active immunity to a particular disease, whatever it may be. The key word here is immunity. It was supposed to prevent you from getting the disease. Yet, the moment these mRNA products were rushed to the market under the Emergency Use Authorization Act, the definition of the word vaccine was suddenly changed by health authorities like the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, or the CDC, and the World Health Organization, or WHO. Suddenly, the word vaccine had its definition changed, to it meaning it only needed to reduce the severity of symptoms and not prevent infection or transmission at all. This raises a very valuable question, a valid stance. Why was there a sudden fundamental shift in a definition that was hundreds of years old? Could possibly one infer, or call it a coincidence, that it happened precisely when Pfizer and Moderna stood to cash in on multi-billion-dollar government contracts? They said these were all free. They weren't. Nothing in life is free. If you don't know that by now, I hate to break it to you. Of course not. This was actually a subtle linguistic sleight of hand, and it was to set the stage for inevitable failure while maintaining the vaccine label for public trust and mandate justification. They literally changed the definition of a word so you couldn't call it wrong at its very definition of being a vaccine. Does this make me a conspiracy theorist? It's just an odd coincidence, right? Like many other coincidences that happened during this time frame, which we'll get into further in the video, which practically this whole video is. I just noticed patterns. I just noticed patterns in life. You haven't seen the rest of my channel. We're big on noticing around here. Now, let's remember when the vaccine first came out. 2021, late 2021, early 22. Everyone was suspicious of it. And the people even said they weren't taking it solely because Trump made it. He's like, I made the vaccine, I stopped it. Yeah. Then Biden came into office, and those same people just flipped the script. The core words from them was safe and effective. This was the lie upon which mandates, social pressure, and the destruction of livelihoods were built. Let's actually break down the phrase safe and effective, because I love breaking down the definitions of words. And we'll start with effective first. The initial claim was that the COVID vaccine was 95% effective, and this was actually a statistical deception. This figure represented the relative risk reduction from a tiny, short-term clinical trial. It's only 2 months. That is unheard of. I'll explain what relative risk reduction is now. And feel free to replay the video if it confuses you. I'm sorry if the explanation is not clear enough in advance. It should be, though. Basically, it is just the percentage by which a new treatment lowers the chance of something bad happening compared with an older treatment or doing nothing. Imagine 100 people in a control group got no medicine at all, and 10 of them had a heart attack. That would mean it's a 10% risk to get a heart attack. Now, 100 people took a new pill, and only 5 of them had a heart attack. This is now a 5% risk. The relative risk reduction is 10 minus 5, which is half. So the pill cuts relative risk by 50%. The absolute risk reduction, we're moving on now to a different term, which is the actual real-world benefit for an individual, was a minuscule 0.84%. Meaning, for 99.16% of people in the trial, the shot provided zero benefit in terms of preventing infection over those 2 months. So they use the words to deceive you. Here's another example of absolute risk reduction. Absolute risk reduction is simply how many percentage points the negative outcome actually drops when you switch from one option to another. And I'll give you another example. Take 100 people in each group. The control, which is no new pill, for example, is that for 10 heart attacks, there is a 10% risk. The people who take a pill, out of 100, only 6 of them get a heart attack. So now the risk is 4%. The absolute risk reduction here is 10%, 10 heart attacks, minus the 4% risk, equals 6. So out of 100 people who took the pill, 6 extra heart attacks are prevented. And the COVID shot effectiveness was just 0.86%. Now, I'm leaving these examples and percentages. We're going to kind of go back to the video and not these examples. But anyways, as the real-world data started to pour in, and the effectiveness numbers, they just kept dropping. As they were announcing you should get it from 95% effective when they started to say all this, then it would go down to 85% effective, to 75%, 60%, 50%, 40%. Until it became clear the shots did nothing to stop transmission. Crucially, though, and this was buried in memory hold and ridiculed, they actively suppressed the proven, cheap, existing treatments that did work against COVID. Hydroxychloroquine with zinc, ivermectin, and high-dose vitamin D showed in multiple studies to significantly reduce viral load. It would reduce hospitalizations, and even reduce the death rate, especially when it was administered early, when you first caught COVID. We even had a doctor do this, and he was ridiculed. His name was Dr. Zelenko. He treated tens of thousands of people successfully, but Big Pharma and the FDA buried the data, they smeared the doctors, and they blocked access for regular people. Because you can't patent and profit off of generic drugs. Hydroxychloroquine, zinc, and vitamin D are old as fuck, and have been shown to be relatively harmless given normal circumstances. And they've been used for a long time for patient care. They didn't want you treating yourself, though. They wanted you dependent on their experimental shot that they could, got a big contract off of from the government. I mean, shit, did no one find it weird that the mayor of New York at the time, Bill de Blasio, went on live TV while eating a burger and fries? That if you got the COVID shot, you could get a free burger. Why would you need to do that for something deemed as a life-saving vaccine, apparently, during an apparently deadly pandemic, and put signs on buses and billboards and posters everywhere to get it, if we lived in a genuinely dangerous pandemic? If you didn't get it, wouldn't you have just died? I mean, our former sitting president, Joe Biden, told the nation that the unvaccinated would face a winter of severe illnesses and death. What in the actual fuck was he talking about? What was that? Now, we just broke down the math on the phrase safe and effective on the word effective, so Let's break down the word safe, because I love telling you what words mean. Because people don't even use the correct words when they speak a lot of the times. Even if I mispronounce words a lot of the time, I still use the right word. Now, the evidence for the word safe, it was proved it was a lie. And the fact that it was a lie was overwhelming, and it was also actively suppressed. Let's start with the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, known as VAERS. While VAERS is a passive reporting system, which means in simple terms, it's like a suggestion box that people can drop a note in if they think a vaccine harmed them. And it underreports events due to this. A consistent rule of thumb, regardless from historical vaccine safety, is that only 1 to 10% of adverse events are ever reported. So that goes to show you, with the massive amount of VAERS reports, that these were actually more dangerous than we thought. Leaks from Pfizer's own trial data, meaning their own research during research and development, released under court order in 2022 due to litigation, were eye-opening. The reports from their own clinical trial documents showed a death rate of 1 person per 800 vaccinated within the trial period, which is a figure orders of magnitude higher than death rates would suggest for the trial demographics. Let's go back to VAERS, though, as this adds further to the already shocking evidence of how dangerous these actually were. Independent analysis of VAERS data, applying standard underreporting factors, consistently pointed to death rates significantly higher than expected. More concretely, the data revealed 10 times more heart damage, like myocarditis, which is inflamed heart muscle and it causes chest pain, and pericarditis, which is also inflammation of the heart muscle that can lead to fluid around the heart, which can possibly lead into CHF or congestive heart failure. This wasn't a theory, it wasn't theoretical, it was real-world data. I've seen it myself, actually, which is anecdotal evidence, but suffice to say, it is my real-world experience. If you're a longtime viewer of mine, you already know this, but if you don't, I worked in EMS, which is the ambulance service, and I did so during COVID. I ran more calls for young male patients, such as guys in their 20s, some of them even being athletes. All were healthy as any normal 20-year-olds are, and they were experiencing chest pain that they had never had before. We'd hooked them up to the monitor, which had EKGs in them, and this stands for electrocardiogram. It shows us their heart rhythm and how it's beating, basically. EKGs, they often look normal, or they just showed a real subtle dysrhythmia. Most of the time it just looked normal, though. During our assessment of the patient, we'd ask them, has anything changed recently that could cause this? And the answer every single time was consistent. I got the COVID vaccine a couple of days ago, or I got the COVID vaccine yesterday. So yeah, that was kind of freaky to see with my own eyes, the stuff I'd be reading about online. And I thank God I never fell for the psyop and I never got the shot. The myocarditis issue of the vaccines was undeniable, especially for young males, like I just mentioned in my example. You couldn't say that at the time, though. You were ridiculed, you were called an anti-vaxxer, and you were shunned. Even if you got all the other vaccines, you're just like, hey, this one's it's kind of freaky. Like I was called at work a few times. Anti-vaxxer at work, because I didn't get the COVID shot. We're running calls on people getting the COVID shot, and it's fucking damaging them. But this is how far the cognitive dissonance ran. I even had a manager yell at me in front of like 20 people and write me up because I wasn't wearing a mask outside in the ambulance parking lot. This is how deep the programming went, outside in a parking lot. And I figured if we were outside, it didn't matter. But anyways, the data then later confirmed that the risk of myocarditis from the vaccine was significantly higher than the risk from getting myocarditis from COVID itself for this demographic, young males. Young men were being hospitalized more because of the shot than the virus it was supposed to protect them against. This wasn't a rare side effect either. It was predictable. It was a common outcome, and it was being deliberately minimized. I still can't believe to this day no one is being held accountable for all this pain and undue suffering. Do you remember them setting up these little fucking biolabs in like a parking lot, and you would drive through and they would jab you in your shoulder? Do you think they told anyone, hey, if you're a young male, you might have an adverse reaction to that? Why were they telling you, hey, here's a cheeseburger and fries if you get the shot? But anyways, that about breaks down the phrase safe and effective now. The phrase was not true. The words that they used were false. Now, let's move on to the mandates. Despite the evidence showing that the vaccines did not simply just work, now everybody's being forced to take it. The mandates kept coming regardless of the evidence that we just dropped on you. One more piece. Let's drop some Jimmy Talks lore again. I was accepted into nursing school in New York, where I lived, in 2021, only to be told I could not attend because I refused to take the COVID shot. The same thing happened with paramedic school. I was accepted and then barred for entry due to the mandate. This happened again in another state when I eventually left New York. It's one of the reasons I haven't even been to college yet. And I'm thinking I might just not need it. I've always been more of the entrepreneurial spirit anyways. But anyways, fuck New York for doing that. The state didn't lose me. They didn't lose the other people. They lost myself and other valuable and already current healthcare workers and taxpayers, all because of a coercive mandate based on a product that didn't stop transmission and carried significant known risk. And that's besides all the other reasons I fled that dystopian state. I mean, it being that they prioritize criminals over law-abiding citizens, very high and expensive taxes, unconstitutional gun laws, but I digress. But the mandates weren't just ruining individual lives, they were wrecking critical institutions. Pentagon data, leaked in 2023, showed a massive, unprecedented spike in severe health events among military personnel immediately following the massive vaccine mandate rollout. We had spikes in cancer, we had spikes in strokes, we had spikes in blood clots, and infertility issues. These weren't just isolated incidents. They were a statistically significant spike across the force. Is it really such a hard leap in logic to conclude that when one variable changes in a massive population, such as the introduction of a new vaccine that's mandated for almost everyone, and then you see a sudden dramatic increase in severe, life-threatening health problems that the shot is the likely cause? Is it that much of a stretch to say? Millions of honest people lost their jobs. A lot of them were fired. A lot of them refused to work because of the mandates forcing them to take a strange and new product that still didn't stop transmission. That was a gene therapy, not a traditional vaccine. Here's even more further evidence of the fraud. There were a lot of reports of hot batches, specific production lots of the vaccine that caused significantly higher rates of negative adverse events and deaths compared to other batches. Why was there hot batches? Why wasn't there rigorous, transparent quality control? Why weren't these dangerous batches immediately recalled and the public warned? Because transparency would have shattered the safe narrative, the safe and effective narrative. Instead, it was hidden. Even more egregious to the fraud. Reports of people being forced to get the jab against their will or having life-saving medical procedures denied unless they complied. Sorry, no heart transplant for you because you didn't voluntarily receive the COVID shot. Isn't that the word voluntarily? It means you don't have to. It just violates the most fundamental ethical principle in medicine. Treat the patient in front of you. I can say all day long myself. I preach for stuff on this channel. I say mass deportations all the time. I think it would make the country a much better place. But if an illegal immigrant had an ambulance call, am I going to say, nope, I'm not going to treat him because he's Mexican, he's illegal? No, I wouldn't do that, obviously. So why are we doing that for people who didn't get the shot? Urgent life-saving care, like a heart transplant, is never contingent on conditions like political compliance or experimental medical procedures that were rolled out with 2-3 months of testing. Conditioning healthcare on vaccination status, this isn't about health anymore. It was about coercion and establishing a system of medical apartheid. You have to wonder, after these shots rolled out, so many good, honest, hardworking people who had no prior health issues suddenly got extremely sick, developed mysterious conditions, or even died immediately following vaccination? Is it really a stretch to say that these are all just a random coincidence? Are we supposed to throw out the basic scientific principle of identifying causation when a single massive variable change precedes a surge in adverse outcomes? Are we just going to accept that millions of previously healthy people collapsing is whatever? The scientific method demands investigation, not dismissal with correlation isn't causation. When the correlation is this stark, and the plausible biological mechanism, or the mRNA technology, instructing the cells to produce spike proteins, which in and of itself is pathogenic, is well established. Now, one could say on this next part of the video, we're moving past the vaccines. One could say we're getting into tinfoil hat territory, but it's still worth mentioning because, again, this is a big pattern that I am noticing. Let's talk about the Great Reset, Build Back Better, and the profiteering that happened while people lost their jobs and they lost their businesses. So the vaccine scam and the mandates, those were the tools, but the agenda was far bigger. This was a global psychological operation, or a psyop, of ridiculous proportions designed to exploit fear to push through radical, long-desired societal restructuring. Enter Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, or the WEF, with their Great Reset. In June 2020, Klaus Schwab explicitly stated this quote, "The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world, to accelerate the transition to the fourth industrial revolution, hasten the shift to digital and contactless payments, and net zero emissions." What exactly does that mean? I don't want to dive into pure tinfoil hat conspiracy theory mode, because honestly, that shuts people down. Let's stick to legitimate questioning based on their own stated goals. Schwab also notoriously said that by 2030, people would own nothing and have no privacy, and you will be happy. Granted, this was in 2016 before COVID, but he still said this. He said these two strange quotes. Is it really unreasonable to ask a global elite financer worth billions of dollars what exactly he means by owning nothing and having no privacy and being happy? Is it strange to question why a pandemic is the rare window to force through a reset involving digital IDs and cashless societies and social credit systems? This isn't paranoia. It's real civic engagement coming from a genuine place. Why shouldn't we demand clarity on these plans? Why was COVID so perfect for this to happen? It was made in a lab, and you also have this big, grandiose plan to make sure nobody owns anything, and it's the perfect timing. The pandemic's perfect timing. Why is that? This agenda was codified, eventually, as Build Back Better, a coordinated global policy push spearheaded by, yet again, the World Economic Forum, and also the International Monetary Fund, and other aligned governments. This was then framed as post-COVID recovery, and its explicit goals, documented in the World Economic Forum publications and policy papers, were to accelerate this: a cashless, centrally digital economy, using fiat currency still, but no more cash. Carbon rationing social credit systems. What does that even mean? In the own nothing and rent everything ownership model, undermining private property. All tied to a universal digital ID by 2030. Why do we need a social credit system? Does it make sense that expressing an unpopular opinion could suddenly restrict your access to services or traveling? Why transition to a fully cashless society where every transaction is monitored and potentially reversible by the state? Why push a system where owning your home or your car becomes obsolete? And the cash thing, that's different than Bitcoin, because Bitcoin can't be controlled. This crypto digital currency, it's much easier to be controlled. And we've seen it with the Canadian ice trucker protests in Toronto afterwards. They froze all their bank accounts. So is it really a stretch to say that having the wrong political opinion can have the government shut your bank account down? And, shout out to our brothers in the North. If you're a Canadian viewer of mine, I have good, high regards for Canadians. I know a lot of them are absolutely cooked, but you're our brothers to the North and we love you. But anyways, why should anyone trust this agenda? Why should anyone trust this? It's sold to us under the banner of recovery from a crisis that itself was heavily manipulated. The timing is too perfect, and the language is too explicit. Does this not ring alarm bells? I'm just asking questions here. I'm just a pattern noticer. So if you follow the money, the scam becomes even more undeniable. Political leadership traded stocks based on insider knowledge. Nancy Pelosi's family, at the very beginning of COVID, they bought $5 million worth of Zoom call options. Why is that? How did she know to get Zoom right when the country shut down? Moderna insiders sold $35 million in stock within 48 hours of the FDA granting emergency use authorization for their COVID vaccine. Meanwhile, Pfizer and other big pharma companies recorded all-time high profits. They raked in hundreds of billions of dollars globally on a product sold with near total liability protection, meaning if it hurt somebody, it didn't really matter. You can get away with it. Small businesses were forcibly shut down and they were deemed as not essential, while Amazon, Target, and Walmart saw record profits as online shopping and essential retail boomed under the restrictions. The economic destruction was targeted. You will own nothing and you will be happy. And they crushed our honest, hardworking people, our mom and pop shops that I try my hardest to go to whenever I go shopping anywhere. But it really made Wall Street a lot richer. This wasn't accidental. This was engineered. So, to kind of wrap this video up, why did COVID suddenly introduce all these strange governmental laws? Why were experimental medical procedures mandated under the threat of losing your job, losing your livelihood, losing your ability to even access society? You can't go in this store if you aren't vaccinated. You can't go to college if you aren't vaccinated. Why is all of that? Why were basic freedoms, like the right to work, to gather, to move freely, suspended based on a virus with a survival rate? It's like 97, maybe it was 99%. It was incredibly high for most populations. Why did we suspend society? Why were masks mandated outdoors in open spaces where viral transmission is virtually impossible? Was it really a crazy conspiracy theory to point out the sheer stupidity of forcing healthy children to wear masks in elementary school playgrounds? Was it anti-science to question why a healthy adult walking alone in a park needed a mask? Did I deserve to be shunned and labeled a danger to society for asking why so many good, honest, hardworking people I knew personally, people I treated in EMS, got extremely sick, developed chronic conditions, or died suddenly, only after receiving a brand new, rushed to the market experimental gene therapy? I knew someone who lost their vision because of this. Personally. Would it be crazy to ask the same questions if a new, untested street drug hit the market and it caused a sudden wave of severe health issues in people? Absolutely not, obviously. It would be the responsible scientific thing to look into. So why was it different for the COVID shot? Because the narrative was controlled. Because questioning it meant being silenced. Because the scam depended on unquestioning obedience. This entire period of history was a display of an absolute dystopian society. I didn't make anything up in this video. This is all true. The safe and effective phrase and it not being safe and effective, the silly little footprints on the floor, the saran-wrapped card readers, the gas mask in Walmart, the blind panic, the censorship, the mandates, the sudden wealth transfer, the suppression of truth, the weaponization of public health against the healthy. That all happened. It was also all a performance. It was a performance designed to break societal resistance, normalize unprecedented government and corporate overreach, accelerate a pre-existing globalist agenda, and enrich a few select at the expense of many. The pandemic was the crisis they exploited, and the vaccine was the tool of the control. And the Great Reset is the endgame they are still pushing towards. The lab leak confirmation came too late for accountability. The vaccine injuries are being dismissed as rare. They're just rare, man. They barely happen. Okay. The mandates cause irreparable harm to trust. They cause harm to society and people's lives. And the people who did all this, they face no consequences. People lost trust in the modern medical system, which is such a shame because it really is a sight to behold. You can do brain transplants. You can do heart transplants. But now people won't even go to the fucking doctor. And I don't blame them because they got lied to. Hell, I work in healthcare and even I'm skeptical of doctors. Because all of them fell for this shit too. But ultimately, they got what they wanted. And that was a population that was conditioned to fear. A population that was conditioned to obey. They were conditioned to accept the erosion of fundamental rights as necessary. It wasn't just confusing, it was really just a con. A massive, global, multi-trillion-dollar scam disguised as a public health emergency. And the scariest part to me personally is that the fact that many people still haven't woken up to it. And also how no one will be held accountable for their crimes against humanity. They're still waiting for the next crisis, the next mandate, the next necessary sacrifice for freedom. Like the whole thing. Only 2 more weeks to flatten the curve if you stay inside your house. Yeah. Don't be one of them. Question everything. Demand transparency. And never ever forget how easily it all happened. Guys, thanks for all watching. I love you all. God bless. America first. Jimmy Talks out.